The dog wasn't supposed to make it through the night. That was what the vet tech at the Kenora Emergency Clinic had said, quietly, to the officer who'd brought him in. A matted, half-starved shepherd mix pulled from a drainage ditch off Highway 17, sometime in the gray hours of a February morning, when the temperature had dropped to -28, and the snow was blowing sideways off Lake of the Woods. The officer had wrapped the animal in his own jacket. He'd driven 40 minutes without turning the radio on. By the time Dex Carver heard about any of this, it was already the following afternoon. He heard about it the way he heard about most things in Kenora, slowly, sideways, from someone who hadn't meant to tell him. His neighbor Pauline had mentioned it at the gas station, something about a dog the OPP found, something about the Humane Society being full, something about nobody stepping forward. She hadn't been looking at him when she said it. She'd been looking at her gloves. Dex had nodded and driven home. He sat in his truck for 11 minutes in his own driveway before he went back out. He was 53 years old, Dex Carver, and he had lived alone in the same house on Rabbit Lake Road for the past 4 years, which was how long it had been since Janet died. The house had 3 bedrooms and he used one. The kitchen had a good stove and he used the burner on the far left. The driveway had room for 2 vehicles and he parked on the right side, always without ever having decided to. Before Janet, there had been the Navy. Before the Navy, there had been a version of himself he barely recognized anymore. A kid from Dryden who thought the world was a problem that could be solved with enough stubbornness. He'd enlisted at 19, been selected for Kansofcom at 26, spent 11 years doing things that didn't get written down in any report he ever saw. He'd come home with both his knees rebuilt and a way of standing in rooms that made strangers uncomfortable without knowing why. Janet had never been uncomfortable. That had been the thing about her. She used to say he looked at every doorway like he was calculating whether it was worth going through. She used to say it like it was funny. He used to pretend it wasn't accurate. The house still smelled like her cedar chest. He hadn't opened it in 4 years. He hadn't moved it either. The clinic was on Matheson Street, run out of the bottom floor of a building that also contained a physiotherapy office and a woman who did taxes. The vet on duty was a young man named Dr. Sorrell, who had the particular look of someone who had been awake for too long and was no longer bothered by it. The dog was in a recovery kennel in the back. Dex stood at the kennel door and looked at him for a long time without saying anything. He was a German shepherd, or mostly one. The vet had said something about a possible Malinois cross, something in the ears, something in the jaw. He was maybe 8 weeks old, maybe 10. It was hard to tell because of the state he was in. His ribs were visible. There was a patch above his left eye where the fur hadn't grown back right, the skin underneath pale and raised. Someone had done something to cause that, or something had happened that no one had been around to prevent. It came to the same place either way. His eyes were open. He was watching Dex with the particular expression that dogs have when they are too tired to be afraid but not ready to trust yet. A kind of waiting that doesn't ask anything. Dex crouched down. The dog's tail moved, just once. Just slightly. Like he'd considered it and decided it was worth the effort. Okay, Dex said. That was the whole conversation. He named him Gravel. Not because it was clever, but because when he first brought the puppy home and set him down on the kitchen floor, the first thing Gravel did was walk directly to the corner where the linoleum met the baseboard, find the single piece of dried mud Dex had tracked in from the driveway, and attempt to have a strong opinion about it. He made a sound. Not quite a bark, not quite a growl, something in between, something like a complaint being filed, and looked up at Dex as if expecting a response. Dex stared at him. Gravel made the sound again. There's nothing there, Dex said. Gravel looked at the mud, looked at Dex, made the sound a third time with what could only be described as editorial emphasis. Dex picked up the piece of mud and put it in the garbage. Gravel immediately walked to the water bowl Dex had set out, drank 3 mouthfuls, and lay down as if the matter was settled, and he was exhausted from the effort of resolving it. That was Monday. By Thursday, Dex had begun to understand that the mud had been the beginning of something, not a one-time event. Gravel had opinions about everything. He had opinions about which side of the couch was acceptable, and which side represented some kind of moral failing. He had opinions about the hour at which breakfast should occur and was willing to express these opinions beginning at 5:40 in the morning. Through a sustained vocal campaign that stopped just short of barking, but contained all the same information. He had opinions about the back door, specifically that it should be open whenever he was near it, and about the specific chair in the kitchen where Dex usually sat with his coffee, which Gravel appeared to believe was a shared resource subject to ongoing negotiation. He didn't bark the way other dogs bark, he talked. There was no other word for it. It was a running commentary, a series of sounds that shifted in pitch and urgency and length depending on what he was trying to convey. And the maddening thing, the thing that Dex would never have admitted to anyone, was that after about 2 weeks he could generally understand what Gravel was trying to convey. The long descending sound meant outside. The short repeated sound meant something is happening, and you are not paying attention to it. The sound that was half growl, half sigh meant he was disagreeing with a decision Dex had made, but was willing to let it go for now. And there was one sound, lower, quieter, used rarely, that Dex didn't have a translation for yet. Gravel made it sometimes in the evenings when the house got very still. When Dex was sitting at the kitchen table with nothing in front of him. Not reading, not watching anything. Just sitting the way a person sits when they can't think of a reason to do anything else. Gravel would come and sit next to him and make that sound. And it wasn't a complaint and it wasn't a demand. It was something else. Dex hadn't figured out what to call it yet. In March, his daughter called. Her name was Simone, and she lived in Sudbury with her husband and 2 kids. And she called every Sunday at around 7 unless something came up, and something came up about once a month. She was 31 and looked like her mother in the particular way that people look like the parent they resemble most when they're doing something specific, in Simone's case, when she was worried and trying not to show it. "You sound different," she said. "I sound the same," Dex said. "You sound like you're in a better room," she said. "I don't know how else to describe it." He looked at Gravel, who was sitting in the middle of the kitchen floor, making a sustained inquiry about the fact that the treat cupboard existed and had not been opened in 45 minutes. "I got a dog," Dex said. There was a silence on the phone that Dex recognized as the kind that contains a lot of things being decided against. "What kind?" Simone finally said. "German Shepherd, mostly. The vet thinks there might be some Malinois." In the ears, another silence. "Dad, you know those are like? Those are working dogs. They need a lot of." Gravel at this precise moment walked to the back door and began a formal presentation on the subject of outside. "Hang on," Dex said. He let Gravel out. He watched through the glass as the puppy took approximately 6 steps into the snow, stopped, looked back at Dex with an expression of betrayal, and then immediately began investigating something near the bottom step with total commitment. "Sorry," Dex said, getting back on the phone. "Was that the dog?" He had a concern. There was a third silence, but this one felt different from the others. "Okay," Simone said. "Okay, I want to hear about him." So Dex told her. He told her about the mud on Monday and the campaign for the treat cupboard and the ongoing debate about the left side of the couch. He told her about the 5:40 morning vocalization, and the editorial emphasis, and the specific sound Gravel made when he disagreed with something but was willing to let it go. He talked for about 20 minutes. He didn't realize until he'd hung up that it was the longest he'd spoken to anyone in approximately 4 months. His friend Lorne drove up from Thunder Bay in April. Lorne Mackay, Dex caught himself. The name was already used. His friend's name was Harlan Voss. They'd served together for 6 years. The kind of together that doesn't require explanation to people who've done it, and can't be explained to people who haven't. Harlan had retired 3 years before Dex, and now ran a property maintenance company in Thunder Bay, and called himself a businessman in the same tone he'd once used to describe himself as many other things, all of which were classified. He arrived at noon on a Saturday with a 12-pack of Labatt and a look on his face that Dex recognized as carefully neutral, the expression of someone who has prepared themselves to be diplomatic about whatever they encounter. Gravel met him at the door. Gravel's greeting consisted of an immediate and thorough inspection of Harlan's boots, one full circuit of Harlan's legs, and then a direct approach to eye level, which, for a puppy who had now been eating properly for 6 weeks, required Gravel to sit up straighter than was strictly natural, followed by a sound that lasted approximately 4 seconds and communicated something Harlan would later describe as instructions. Harlan looked at Dex over the dog's head. "He's telling you to take your boots off," Dex said. "Is he? He has a thing about boots in the house. He has." Harlan stopped, looked at Gravel, looked back at Dex. "When did you get a dog with policies?" "February," Dex said. "You want coffee?" Harlan took his boots off. They sat at the kitchen table for a long time that afternoon, with Gravel moving between them in the way that dogs move when they're monitoring a conversation they've decided requires supervision. He settled eventually under Harlan's chair, which Dex noted without mentioning it. Gravel was not, as a rule, a dog who settled under other people's chairs. He was a dog who positioned himself where he could see everything and reserved the right to comment. "He looks like he's been through it," Harlan said, meaning the scar above the eye, the way the fur still grew unevenly on the left shoulder. "Yeah," Dex said. "Came out the other side, though." "Yeah." Harlan drank his coffee. Gravel, under the chair, made the low quiet sound, the one Dex hadn't found a name for yet, like he was agreeing with something or acknowledging something, but too quietly to be sure. Harlan looked down at him. Then he looked at Dex. "He's good for you," he said. It wasn't a question. Dex didn't answer. He didn't need to. In May, the trouble started. It wasn't dramatic trouble. It wasn't the kind of thing that would look like anything from the outside. Dex didn't exactly understand it himself until it had been happening for a while. It started because Gravel was now 4 months old, which meant he had energy the way a river has water. Not as a feature of himself, but as a basic condition. And 4 months also meant he had figured out that the world beyond Rabbit Lake Road was full of things that required his immediate assessment. The ditch behind the house. The tree line where the deer came through in the evenings. The road, specifically the section of road where Kenny Arbor's cattle dog sometimes appeared on the wrong side of the fence and sat there looking at Gravel like a philosophical challenge. Dex had started walking him. This was not something he'd planned. He had not walked as a deliberate activity in 4 years. He'd moved, from truck to store to truck to house, but walking had felt too much like an argument he didn't want to have with himself. Too much time, too little to concentrate on. Gravel, it turned out, made walking impossible to avoid and impossible to do halfway. He walked with his nose down and his ears up and his whole body producing a continuous low-level report of everything he encountered. He stopped at things Dex couldn't see and produced brief commentary. He greeted every person they passed with a formal presentation of himself, not jumping, never jumping, but sitting squarely in front of them and making a specific sound that Dex had eventually understood was his name. He was introducing himself. He expected the same in return. People on the road started knowing Gravel's name before they knew Dex's missus. Pelletier, who had lived 2 houses down for 6 years without doing more than wave, stopped them one morning, and crouched down and let Gravel put his chin on her knee and was quiet for a moment, in a way that suggested she needed that specific thing right then. She looked up at Dex and said, Janet would have loved him. Then she stood up and walked back to her house, and that was all. Dex stood on the road for a while after that. Gravel made the low, quiet sound. The trouble, the actual trouble, was this. There was a man named Curtis Brandt who owned the property at the end of Rabbit Lake Road, the one that had been the Hollingsworth place before the Hollingsworths moved to Portage-la Prairie. Curtis Brandt was about 60, recently retired from something in the mining sector, and he had come to Kenora, as best Dex could tell, to be unhappy about it somewhere scenic. He had a particular hostility to dogs running loose, to children making noise near the water, to vehicles that went more than 40 on the road, even though the sign said 60. He also had a way of standing on his property that communicated something Dex recognized from a different context, the kind of deliberate stillness that was its own form of aggression. In May, Curtis Brandt called Animal Services to report that a dog on Rabbit Lake Road had been running loose and harassing wildlife. The Animal Services officer, a woman named Terry who had a tired but not unkind face, came to Dex's door on a Tuesday. She explained the complaint. She explained that she was required to follow up. She looked at Gravel, who was sitting next to Dex's leg making the sound he made when he was gathering information. Is Is he talking? Terry said. He has thoughts, Dex said. Terry looked at her clipboard, looked at Gravel. The complaint says he was off-leash. He was on my property, Dex said, which is 350 meters from the road. Okay, Terry said. She wrote something down. She looked at Gravel again. Gravel looked back at her with the particular attention he gave to new people, the full and serious consideration that most humans reserved for important decisions. He seems fine, she said. He is fine, Dex said. I have to file a response. I'll note the property bounds. She started to turn, then stopped. For what it's worth, I've gotten 3 calls from Curtis Brandt this year. He called about a kid's basketball net in February. She looked at her clipboard again as if consulting it for permission. I'm just saying. After she left, Dex stood on his porch for a few minutes. Gravel sat next to him and looked out at the road with the expression he wore when he'd assessed a situation and found it manageable. I know, Dex said. Gravel glanced at him. I know, Dex said again. Gravel turned back to the road. The sound he made was short and skeptical. What Dex had not told Simone, and had not told Harlan, was that the winter had been bad in a way he hadn't been prepared for. He had expected the 4th winter to be like the others, long and gray, and requiring a certain mechanical movement through the days, one thing after another until spring arrived and gave him something different to be mechanical about. He had survived 3 winters that way. He'd assumed the 4th would be the same. But there had been a night in January about 3 weeks before Gravel, when Dex had sat at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning and found himself unable to think of a single reason to get up and go to bed. Not because he was tired, not because anything was wrong. Just the absence of a reason, like standing at a door that opens onto another room you've been in so many times you can't remember why you'd go there. He hadn't told anyone about that night. He wasn't sure what he would have said. I sat at my table for a while. Nothing happened. I got up eventually. It wasn't a story. It barely qualified as an event, but it had stayed with him the way some things stay, not sharp, just present, like a bruise you keep forgetting until you press it. After Gravel, the nights were different. Not because Gravel fixed anything. Dex didn't believe in things being fixed. He believed in things being workable or not workable, and he'd built his life around keeping as much as possible in the workable column. What Gravel did was something simpler and more stubborn than fixing. He demanded to be noticed. He demanded response. He woke up at 2 in the morning sometimes, and made his way from his bed in the corner to the kitchen table, and produced a brief inquiry into why Dex was there, and whether something was going to be done about it. The first time this happened, Dex had looked at him and said, "Go back to bed." Gravel had looked at the kitchen table, looked at Dex, and sat down. The second time, Dex had made himself a cup of tea. Gravel had approved of this decision, apparently, because he'd gone back to his bed. The third time, Dex had gotten up before Gravel could say anything, and they'd gone outside together and stood on the porch in the dark for a while. The lake was frozen and flat and very pale under the February sky, and Gravel had stood next to Dex's leg and made no sound at all. Just breathed. Just was there. Dex had understood, standing on that porch, that this was what the quiet sound meant. The low one, the one he hadn't been able to name. It meant, I am also here. It meant, this counts as something. It wasn't comfort exactly, or not only comfort, it was more like testimony. Like Gravel was saying, I see that you are in this room at 2 in the morning, and I am recording it, and you are not alone in it. Dex had never had a word for what that was worth. He still didn't. He stood on the porch a while longer, and then they went inside, and both of them went to sleep. Curtis Brandt filed a second complaint in June. This one alleged that Gravel had approached him in an aggressive and threatening manner, while Curtis was walking on the public road. Dex read the Animal Services follow-up form in his driveway for a long time. Then he called Simone. Don't do anything yet, she said immediately, which was how Dex knew he'd sounded a particular way on the phone. I'm not going to do anything. Dad, I said, I'm not going to do anything. The way you said that last sentence was a thing that I'm going to need you to unpack for me. Gravel, in the passenger seat. He'd recently decided the passenger seat was his, was watching Dex with his ears in the position that meant he was tracking something. His name is Curtis Brandt, Dex said. He's been making complaints. About the dog, okay, Simone said. Okay. And Gravel, what actually happened? We were walking on the road. Gravel was on his lead. Curtis came the other way. Gravel sat down and looked at him. A beat. That's... He just sat down. He introduced himself, and Curtis Brent found that threatening. Curtis Brent, Dex said carefully, is a man who has found a basketball net threatening. Okay, Simone said. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to let it sit for 2 days. You're not going to talk to Curtis Brent. You're not going to do anything. And then after 2 days, if you still feel like you need to do something, we'll figure out what that looks like. Dex was quiet for a moment. Gravel made the short editorial sound, which in this context Dex interpreted as endorsement of Simone's position. He agrees with you, Dex said. Good, he's the smarter one, Simone said. Love you, 2 days. She hung up. Dex sat in the driveway. Gravel put his head on Dex's shoulder. I know, Dex said. Gravel was quiet. What happened next was not anything Dex planned or executed. It had its own logic, the way certain things do when you stop trying to manage them. He ran into Curtis Brent at the hardware store in town the following week. Not looking for him, not prepared for it. Curtis was at the paint counter and Dex was getting deck screws, and they came around the same aisle at the same moment, and there was nowhere to go. Curtis was a tall man, broad, with the particular density of someone who had once been physically powerful and was now mostly inertia. He looked at Dex the way he'd looked at the road from his property, with that deliberate, contained hostility that had a shape to it. Dex looked at him. Gravel was outside in the truck. Even so, Dex felt the absence of him the way you feel the absence of something you've become accustomed to carrying. Mr. Brent, Dex said. Curtis looked at him for another moment. Your dog has been a problem, he said. Dex was quiet for a beat, not the strategic quiet of someone planning, the natural quiet of someone deciding whether this was worth it. He sat down and looked at you, Dex said. He approached me. He introduces himself to people. It's what he does. I don't want him approaching me. Dex looked at him for a while, looked at the paint counter, the sample cards in their rows of color from one kind of beige to another. He was in a drainage ditch in February, Dex said. Someone put him there. He came out of it with a scar on his face and a thing he does where he introduces himself to everyone he meets. He looked back at Curtis. I don't know what he's deciding when he does that, but he does it with everybody. Curtis didn't say anything. I'll keep him on lead when we're on the road, Dex said. I've been doing that anyway, but I'm not going to make him stop looking at people. He picked up his deck screws and went to the register. He didn't know what Curtis Brent did after that. He didn't check. He got in his truck and drove home, and Gravel put his head on his knee and made the sound that meant, something happened, but you're here and that's fine. There were no more complaints filed. Simone came up in July with the kids. Her children, Dex's grandchildren, were 8 and 6, Willa and Marcus, and they arrived making the kind of noise that children make when they've been in a car for 2 hours and have opinions about it. Gravel met them at the end of the driveway. What followed was the most elaborate introduction ceremony Dex had ever witnessed. Gravel went to Willa first. He sat down in front of her at a careful distance, made a single sound, the name sound, the introductory one, and waited. Willa, who was 8 and had strong views about animals, crouched down immediately and said, Hi, I'm Willa. I'm his granddaughter. Then she looked at Dex. Does he understand? He understands more than you'd expect, Dex said. Gravel apparently found this answer satisfactory. He moved to Marcus, repeated the ceremony, waited while Marcus said hello in a whisper, and then, when Gravel didn't move, said hello again slightly louder, as if the volume were the variable. Then Gravel turned around and led them all to the back porch as if he'd been planning the tour. Simone stood next to Dex in the driveway and watched this happen. He does that with everyone, she said. He did it with the animal services officer. Simone looked at him. She also found it disarming, Dex said. They walked to the back porch where Gravel had arranged himself in the center of things. Not between the children and Dex, not positioning himself as anything. Just present, just there, the way he'd learned to be. Willa was already telling him about her school. Marcus had found a stick that he was using to point at things Gravel should look at, and Gravel was looking at them. Simone sat down in the chair next to Dex's, the same chair that was technically Gravel's chair. By the terms of an ongoing negotiation, Gravel clocked this and made a brief sound in that direction, then returned his attention to Marcus and the stick. "He's not going to fight me for the chair?" Simone asked. "He's making a concession," Dex said. "He does that sometimes, when he decides something matters more." Simone was quiet for a moment. She looked at her children and the dog and the lake at the end of the property, still and bright in the July afternoon. "How are you, Dad?" she said. Not a question exactly, more like an arrival. "I'm workable," Dex said. She nodded. She knew what he meant by that. "He's good for you," she said, the same words Harlan had said but differently, with more inside them. "Yeah," Dex said. Gravel from the middle of the porch made the low, quiet sound. The one that meant, "I am also here. This counts as something." The summer light came through the birches at the edge of the property, and the lake was very still, and Willow was asking Gravel about his scar. And Marcus was standing nearby with his stick, waiting to be useful, and Simone's hand was warm on the armrest between their chairs. Dex sat in his chair on the porch of his house on Rabbit Lake Road and did not think about doorways or reasons, or the table at 2 in the morning. He thought about nothing in particular. He was just in the room. He was just there, and so was Gravel. And that was the whole of it, and it was enough.